In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, on a distant, corpse-choked war zone at the fringes of the galaxy, an Imperial guardsman crouches in a half-collapsed trench, last gun clenched in white-knuckled hands. All around him lies a butcher's yard of broken bodies and twisted metal. He wonders in a half-delirious daze if the God Emperor can even see this forsaken corner of the galaxy through the pall of smoke and ash that chokes its skies. The 41st millennium has known only war, and so has he. And as another enemy onslaught gathers with earth-shaking rumbles, and no reinforcements arrive in time, a seditious thought creeps unbidden into his mind. What if all those prayers and promises were lies? What if there is another way to survive this nightmare? This is how it begins. Not with fanfare or a thunderclap of instant heresy, but with quiet despair, anger, and the smallest cracks in an Imperial soldier's faith. From those hairline fractures, the tendrils of chaos seep in. The process can be agonizingly slow or brutally swift, but the outcome is the same. A proud regiment of the Astra Militarum, Imperial Guard, forsakes its oaths to the Golden Throne and embraces the ruinous powers of chaos. It's a fall from grace on a massive scale, the transformation of dutiful human soldiers into the warped and wretched servants of the lost and the damned. And disturbingly, it happens more often than the Imperium would care to admit. Seeds of heresy. How loyal soldiers turn. Psychological trauma and disillusionment. Every guardsman begins service indoctrinated to revere the Emperor and hate the heretic. But belief can crumble under the weight of incessant horror. The Imperial Guard's lot is to endure endless carnage artillery barrages that last for days, waves of slavering Xenos charging into last gunfire, the screams of dying comrades echoing night after night. Living in such a meat grinder takes a mental toll. At first, a soldier clings to faith. The Emperor protects, he recites, rocking back and forth in a foxhole while shells shake the ground. Yet, with each fresh nightmare, those words ring a little more hollow. Consider the psychological attrition of a years-long campaign. Sleep is haunted by nightmares of alien jaws and warp-spawned horrors. The regiment's commissars demand unwavering courage, but offer little comfort beyond rote scripture and threats. Over time, numbness sets in. The lucky guardsmen become callously desensitized to death. The unlucky ones break entirely. Fear turns to hopelessness, and hopelessness to resentment. A trooper might start asking why entire platoons are being sacrificed for inch-deep gains of muddy ground. Why has the Emperor not saved them, despite all their prayers? Where is the promised reward for their loyalty? These seditious thoughts are the first cracks forming in a soldier's soul. In the Imperium, such doubt is itself a crime. A good servant of the Emperor is expected to suffer and die without question. The moment a guardsman's faith falters, he has no outlet. Voicing despair would invite a commissar's bolt round to the skull. So the doubts fester silently. Among guardsmen, a bitter joke sometimes circulates. If the enemy doesn't kill you, the commissar will. It's a cynical quip born of fatalism. A sense that they're damned if they do, and damned if they don't. When soldiers see their friends fed into the grinder for nothing, or watch a callous commander squander lives in a vain show of pride, the realization hits that the Imperium views them as expendable. They're not mighty heroes of humanity, they're ammunition. The bitterness that realization breeds is fertile ground for chaos. It often starts small, a cynical joke at the Emperor's expense muttered under the breath, or a refusal to sing the regimental hymn with the usual zeal. Little rebellions of the mind. Chaos is patient. It notices those tiny betrayals of faith. In the warp, the dark gods and their daimonic servants are always listening for weakness. A traumatized mind riddled with survivor's guilt and terror becomes susceptible to whispers. Perhaps it's the voice of a fallen comrade, or so it seems, heard in a fever dream, assuring the soldier that there is no judgment for what he's done, only a new path. Or a hallucination during a lull in battle, a fleeting vision of a shadow with outstretched hand, offering salvation of a very different kind. The psychological collapse of a single guardsman can be the spark that eventually consumes an entire unit. After all, despair is contagious. One soldier's loss of faith can spread to his squad mates, especially in the long, miserable downtime between combats when troops huddle together and share their grievances. Trauma and disillusionment thus form the emotional bedrock of betrayal. By the time a regiment turns traitor, you can be certain many of its soldiers have witnessed such unimaginable horrors that their view of the Emperor's grace has been shattered. The promises of Imperial propaganda, that duty is its own reward, that faith will shield the righteous, become cruel jokes in the face of what they've seen. And so, in dark corners of the trenches or barracks, they start to laugh bitterly at those promises. Gallows humor morphs into outright sacrilege. The line between jest and genuine heresy blurs. With no hope of relief, some conclude that a quick damnation might be preferable to an endless, thankless demise. If death and insanity are all the Emperor offers them, maybe, just maybe, chaos could offer something better. That desperate logic is the first step toward damnation. Warp corruption and demonic influence. The warp, the immaterial dimension of chaos, presses in on reality at every moment, and soldiers often fight in its shadow. Sometimes an Imperial Guard regiment falls not through slow erosion, but through an abrupt kiss of the warp's corrupting power. The proximity of warp energies, whether from a nearby warp storm, a chaos-tainted artifact, or a psyker gone catastrophically out of control, can erode the sanity and soul of even the most loyal troops. Stories abound of regiments stationed near the Eye of Terror, or the Great Rift, where the warp bleeds into real space, who begin experiencing impossible things. Disembodied voices slithering into their dreams, hallucinations of loved ones long dead beckoning to them, sudden violent compulsions that can't be explained. In these situations, chaos isn't just whispering, it's shouting. On the battlefield, this influence might manifest as uncanny strokes of luck or unreasoning terror that rattle the soldier's creed. Perhaps the squad's devout chaplain, reciting litanies of protection, is the first to be ripped apart by an unseen force, a grotesque mockery of faith's powerlessness, or strange phenomena occur. A guardsman's shadow moves on its own, stretching into a winged shape that recalls a demon's outline. The Vox net crackles with what sounds like demonic giggling beneath the static. Such incidents sow terror and confusion. Men begin to suspect that the Emperor's light truly cannot reach them out here in the dark. When reality itself buckles, how do you cling to old certainties? Worse are cases of direct possession or mutation. The Imperial Guard employs psychers, sanctioned psychers, astropaths, to aid their forces. But these individuals are potential gateways for warp denizens. If a battle psyker loses control or is seduced by whispers from the Immaterium, he might unwittingly open a door to hell in the midst of the regiment. A summoned demon, or a swarm of lesser ones, erupts into reality, tearing apart chains of command, often literally. Amidst the carnage and witchfire, some soldiers drop to their knees in abject terror or misplaced worship, their minds broken. Others, seeing the power even a minor demon wields, feel a perverse awe. The daemon might even spare those who prostrate themselves while slaughtering the devout, sending a clear message about which master actually holds sway here. Over time, or even in a single twisted night, exposure to warp corruption can tip a regiment over the edge. Once a few soldiers start listening to the warp whispers, or carrying out the suggestions that slither into their thoughts, the corruption spreads like a virus. In some cases, entire companies undergo a kind of synchronized madness under warp influence, performing atrocities as if guided by an invisible hand. They might begin painting profane symbols in blood on their vehicles, or holding bizarre midnight rituals instead of sleeping, all driven by half-remembered commands from their dreams. By the time the commissariat or loyal officers realize these aren't isolated incidents, but a full-blown spiritual infection, it's often too late. The regiment is compromised from within, spiritually hijacked by chaos. When the moment is ripe, say during a particularly intense battle or a chaotic retreat, the dam breaks. The corrupted core of the regiment rises up, sometimes led by a newly emerged witch or demon host in their ranks, and slaughters the uncorrupted remainder of their comrades. The former Imperial soldiers then kneel in unison to the Blood God, or the Plague Lord, or whichever ruinous power has claimed their souls, and a new traitor regiment howls its birth cry into the night. Incompetent or heretical leadership. We march for months through toxic mud, lose half the company to enemy fire, and in the end our commander orders a retreat because of a faulty Auspex reading? Emperor, save us from idiots in high places. Such grumblings are common in any army, but in the Astra Militarum, they can take on a sharper edge. The Guard is massive, and not every officer is a paragon of genius or virtue. When a regiment is saddled with an inept or callously cruel leader, the seeds of rebellion find especially fertile soil. Men and women who might have stomached hardship for a competent, caring commander will eventually balk at being ordered to certain death by an arrogant fool. In the most dire cases, leadership itself becomes the vector of corruption. A colonel or general might secretly be a chaos cultist, steering his own troops toward damnation from the start. Imagine the betrayal. A beloved commanding officer who always seemed peculiarly lenient toward the regimental preacher's missteps is eventually caught conducting a nocturnal ritual by candlelight, chanting to dark gods. By the time suspicious subordinates piece together the truth, that officer may have already converted a clique of loyal lieutenants to his hidden cult. A regiment can rot from the head down. Sometimes it's not premeditated heresy, but simple incompetence that opens the door. A commander's repeated blunders, endless frontal assaults, mismanaged supplies leading to starvation, failure to evacuate the wounded, can decimate a unit's trust. Commissars can only execute so many malcontents before the rank and file realize the real problem isn't their own cowardice, but their leader's stupidity. In a grinding war, an officer who values his pride over his men's lives might eventually face mutiny. If that mutiny happens, chaos is ready to capitalize. The rebels might not start with any intent to serve the dark gods. They may simply want to frag the idiot giving senseless orders. But once they've crossed the Rubicon of turning against Imperial authority, even for understandable reasons, they become targets for every demagogue and demon looking for an opening. History provides stark examples. On the armory world of Vraks, a single corrupt and power-hungry cardinal, Zaphon, managed to throw an entire garrison into rebellion against the Imperium. He wasn't even a guard general, just the head of the local ministorum. But by abusing his authority and playing on grievances, poor treatment of workers and soldiers, he ignited a war that drew in millions of traitors and eventually the forces of chaos itself. The lesson is clear. When those at the top fall, they can drag everyone beneath them into hell. A colonel turned heretic can rally his regiment to his side, especially if he masks the betrayal as a righteous new cause. The Emperor has abandoned us, but I will lead you to victory. Follow me. Even absent outright heresy, leadership failure can drive good soldiers to bad choices. Desperate and leaderless, a unit might respond to disaster by following a charismatic sergeant or tank ace who promises survival at any cost. If that new, self-appointed leader then strikes a deal with a chaos warlord for aid, the troops may not even realize the full extent of what they've signed up for until it's too late. By then, they've burned their bridges with the Imperium. Literally, in some cases, as traitor guards have been known to torch their own HQs and burn any Imperial flags they once flew. In short, when the chain of command breaks, either through corruption at the top or rebellion from below, the discipline that held chaos at bay goes with it. Soldiers used to following orders now must choose whom to obey or whether to obey anyone at all. In that moment of uncertainty, a silver-tongued heretic or a demon masquerading as a guiding spirit can slip in and start giving orders of its own. And after a long period of suffering under bad leadership, many guardsmen will follow anyone who promises a clearer path, even a serpent leading them straight into the warp. Subversion from within. Cults and sleeper agents. Not all corruption assaults the regiment from outside or top-down. Often it germinates in the dark corners among the soldiers themselves, quietly spreading until it's ready to bloom in bloodshed. The Imperium is painfully aware that chaos cults can fester in any population, and a regiment of tens of thousands of young, stressed, half-broken men and women is as good a breeding ground as any. These troops are far from home, frightened and superstitious. They swap trench rumors and ghost stories under red-lit bivouac tents. If even one of them has a copy of a heretical pamphlet or a strange talisman passed down from a cousin in the hive gangs, or just an unusually charismatic personality with a nihilistic streak, you have a potential cult leader in the making. Chaos cults within the Guard often start as secret societies or clubs under innocuous pretenses. Maybe a group of soldiers starts gathering to share contraband amasec and gripe about how the Munitorum shorted their ammo supply again. Harmless, seditious talk at first, but then one of them has the bright idea that prayers might achieve more than the Tactica Imperialis has. He teaches his buddies a new prayer he found, in truth taught to him in a vision by a demon, or smuggled in from a cult back home. They start reciting this strange litany before battle, quietly, out of earshot of the Commissar, a prayer not to the Emperor, but to the true Savior, or some other euphemism for a ruinous power. When those soldiers then find a feral grin plastered on their faces in the heat of combat, or bullets miraculously miss them, the cult's seedling belief is reinforced. Their hidden god must be protecting them. So the circle widens. They recruit a few more disillusioned souls. Sleeper agents from chaos cults also infiltrate regiments intentionally. The Imperium raises guard regiments from all over the galaxy, including worlds that may already harbor secret chaos activity. It's not unthinkable that a few cult devotees lie low during recruitment to get into the Guard, with the express mission of subverting it from within when the time is right. These sleepers pretend piety and discipline by day. By night, they meet in abandoned munition bunkers or deep in the bowels of the troop ship to perform small profane ceremonies. They might not be able to summon a bloodletter in the barracks, too obvious, but they can spread poisonous ideas under the guise of barracks gossip. I heard on Calixus Prime, an entire platoon laid down arms and the arch-enemy spared them. Maybe we should consider that if things go south here. Such treacherous suggestions, repeated often enough by people who seem like just another comrade, can wear away at loyalty. Chaos also subverts via temptation. A common tactic, a cultist posing as a simple camp follower or quartermaster sidles up to disgruntled soldiers with offers that sound benign at first. "You're starving, friend. I know where we can find some extra rations, no questions asked." The rations turn out to be tainted food offered in a ritual to Nurgle, beginning the eater's slow dedication to the Plague Lord. Or a soldier anxious about an upcoming assault is offered a tiny vial of strange liquid to bolster courage, a combat drug laced with warp ichor that connects him subtly to Slaanesh's embrace. By the time the target realizes something is wrong, if he ever does, he's already stepped over the line, becoming dependent on the cult's gifts and camaraderie. Once a chaos cult takes root in a regiment, it grows like a cancer. The cultists operate in cells to avoid detection, but they coordinate enough to carry out sabotage or morale-sapping stunts. Maybe they arrange an accident for that particularly devout sergeant who would never break faith, a loosened bolt on a chimera's fuel line that ensures he burns alive when the engine sparks. As more moral voices are silenced and more fence-sitters quietly recruited, the cult's confidence grows. By the time the commissars or priests catch the scent of heresy, and they usually do eventually, perhaps a profane symbol graffitied on a latrine door, or an informant reports strange chanting in the dark, the cult is already entrenched. A purge attempt at that point might just trigger the open revolt the cultists were preparing for anyway. It's worth noting that some traitor guard forces originate entirely from such cult subversion. They weren't sent to war already corrupted. They became corrupted on the front, and then actively sought out the enemy. In the Sabbat World's Crusade, for example, an infamous chaos military cult called the Blood Pact was so disciplined and effective, it was said many of its warriors were former Imperial guardsmen, or PDF soldiers turned by chaos agents. Likewise, on supposedly secure worlds like Cadia, even with its harsh anti-chaos training, sleeper agents managed to infiltrate, as with the Volscani Cataphracts' treachery, which we'll discuss later. The reality is that when it comes to corruption, your worst enemy might be the brother-in-arms sharing your trench, the one you never knew was chanting profanities under his breath as the shells fell. Chaos can wage a war for a regiment's soul from the inside, and by the time the Imperium notices, that war might already be lost. Temptations of power, vengeance, and survival. Beyond fear and subversion lurk the more intentional reasons a soldier or regiment might turn. The lure of what chaos promises. Unlike the Emperor, who demands sacrifice with distant abstract rewards, the Chaos Gods can be far more tangible in their incentives. For a battle-weary or vengeful soul, these incentives can be irresistible. Power. The Imperial Guard is a rigid hierarchy where a common trooper's life is as cheap as his flak armor. Those with ambition often find it stymied. You can't exactly will yourself into becoming a space marine or a sector governor. But chaos? Chaos loves ambition. There are whispers of mortal men raised high in the dark god's favor, becoming mighty warlords, sorcerers, even demon princes. The idea that a mere guardsman could ascend to such heights is intoxicating. An Imperial officer frustrated by bureaucratic superiors or denied glory might decide to seek patronage from a ruinous power instead. The Chaos Gods will use that hunger. A frustrated tank commander might be lured to Tzeentch by promises of arcane knowledge to outwit his rivals. Or a brutish sergeant might be drawn to Khorne with the promise of never-ending victories and a throne atop a mound of skulls. Unlike the Emperor, who will never acknowledge an individual guardsman no matter how valorous, a Chaos God just might whisper directly into your mind, praising your kills and offering you more if you continue the bloodshed in their name. Vengeance. The thirst for revenge is another powerful hook. There are countless scenarios in which a regiment or its remnants might feel betrayed by the Imperium itself. Perhaps High Command abandoned them on a strategically unimportant moon to buy time for someone else's escape, writing them off as a necessary loss. Or an order comes down to perform a suicidal attack purely to distract the enemy, effectively using the regiment as bait. If by some cruel twist those soldiers survive or realize the gambit, their resentment can be immeasurable. Chaos feeds on such betrayal. Imagine a commander seething after half his men were left to die needlessly. When a Chaos emissary, maybe a sly Alpha Legion agent or a shape-shifting demon of Tzeentch, appears offering a chance to get back at the Imperium that betrayed them, many will leap at it. Even the most pious soldier can be driven to heresy if he feels wronged enough by those he once served. They abandoned us, so why should we continue to bleed for them? Let's make them pay. That sentiment can turn a lost regiment into a bloodthirsty warband bent on sticking it to their former masters. Survival and the devil's bargain. Sometimes turning to chaos isn't about grand power or spite, but simply survival in a hopeless situation. The galaxy throws utterly impossible scenarios at the Guard. Planetary invasions by tyrannids where death is certain, demon incursions where no reinforcements will arrive in time, or being stranded on a dying world with dwindling food and ammo. In those dire straits, an offer of salvation from a mysterious benefactor can seem like the only lifeline. For instance, consider a scenario: a regiment isolated on a tyrannid-infested world, forgotten due to a bureaucratic oversight. They have radioed for rescue countless times to no avail. Men are dying each day, ammo cells nearly dry, and the swarms close in a little more with each sunset. Then, at their bleakest hour, an unexpected signal crackles over the Vox. Not the Imperial Navy, but something worse. Or perhaps, to them in that moment, something better. It's a traitor vessel offering evacuation. Imagine the hush in the command bunker as this sinks in. The colonel knows what it means: salvation at the cost of their souls. His veteran sergeant, eyes sunken from starvation, meets his gaze and silently nods. They both understand. The order is given. "Accept help from the heretics," comes the broken command. In that moment, the regiment crosses the threshold. The traitor commander offers the starving, ammunition-depleted guardsmen a deal. "Swear yourselves to our cause, and we will take you off this planet." Many of those weary soldiers would waver. Is it truly betrayal to accept rescue when your own side has left you for dead? The more hardline loyalists might rather die than turn, but others want to see home again, or simply see another sunrise. Abandonment doesn't have to be literal either. A regiment can feel abandoned even in the presence of allies if their plight is ignored. We see this in Hive City sieges, where under-Hive militia, nominally loyal, fight tooth and nail against cultists, but receive no recognition or relief from the noble houses above. Eventually, the militiamen think, why are we dying for those who don't even acknowledge our sacrifice? The next time the Chaos cult offers an alliance, perhaps promising the downtrodden underhivers food and medicine in exchange for switching sides, the offer is accepted. This dynamic played out tragically on Vraks, as chronicled in the novel Necropolis. Entire factions of a hive's workforce turned traitor after feeling betrayed by their leaders. It can happen on battlefronts too. Imagine being in the 10th year of a crusade where fresh regiments cycle through as reinforcements. But yours is never rotated out or honored, left to do the dirtiest, deadliest tasks. The sense of injustice and isolation festers. "We are nothing to them," the soldiers mutter. And Chaos answers, "You are everything to us." When attrition has whittled a unit down, even the chain of command can collapse simply because too many officers died. Junior leaders left in charge might not have the same indoctrination or strength of will. A bitter sergeant turned acting captain might decide that since the Imperium has effectively used up and written off his people, he'll use whatever means necessary to keep them alive. even if that means negotiating with a warband of Chaos Marines for passage off-world, offering their service in return. It's a devil's bargain made in exhaustion and grief. The Imperium is aware of this danger, of course. Ideally, reinforcements, resupply, or inspirational commissars are sent in time to prevent final collapses of morale. But the galaxy is vast and uncaring. Many times help does not arrive, and so time and desperation do the work that all the propaganda in the world could not undo. When the breaking point is finally reached, an entire regiment might walk off the front line, guns in hand, and defect en masse to the enemy. What started as a few grumbling malcontents ends as a full unit standing under a new banner, their old battle standard trampled in mud. At that stage, there's often no going back. They've spilled the blood of fellow Imperial soldiers during their defection, in firefights between loyalists and turncoats, or they've openly blasphemed the Emperor's name. The bridges are burned. With grim resolve, these once loyal soldiers accept that they are now dead to the Imperium they served. They embrace a new identity as the damned, telling themselves it's better than the fate they were otherwise given, to die forgotten. It is tragic, but in their eyes entirely justified. Thus, through a culmination of all these pressures, psychological trauma, warp corruption, failed leadership, cult influence, tempting promises, and plain despair, a proud Imperial Guard regiment crosses the final line and falls into the waiting arms of chaos. Their oaths to the Emperor are replaced by savage war cries to the dark gods, and the pages of Imperial history record their name with the damning label Traitor Militarum forevermore. The four ruinous powers, chaos gods on the battlefield. When an Imperial Guard regiment falls, it doesn't always do so under the generic banner of Chaos Undivided. Often the troopers are pulled in a particular direction by one of the four major chaos gods. Each deity, Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, has its own distinct flavor of corruption and unique appeal to soldiers in the field. The way a regiment behaves and fights after turning will reflect the patron power that has claimed their souls. Let's examine each in turn as their influence manifests in a military context. Khorne, the blood god's embrace. Khorne is the chaos god of war, rage, and bloodshed, and his influence on a military unit is as straightforward as it is brutal. A regiment that falls to Khorne undergoes a violent cultural shift. Discipline may remain, but it is redirected toward one purpose: slaughter. Khorne cares not from where the blood flows, only that it flows, and Khorne-worshipping guardsmen become fierce avatars of war. They often daub their armor in red, marking themselves with blood sigils or the skull rune of Khorne. Many throw off their helmets to feel the spray of enemies' blood on their faces, taking it as a sacrament. In battle, these Khornate traitors favor close combat with a fanatic's enthusiasm. Whereas once they might have hunkered in cover trading lass fire, now they are prone to fix bayonets and charge screaming into enemy lines, chain blades revving and swords raised high. They'll fire their guns too. Khorne doesn't mind the use of firepower as a means to kill, but there is a palpable impatience in them to get to grips with the foe personally. The sound of roaring chain axes, frenzied battle cries, and the wet crunch of melee combat becomes the horrifying signature of a Khornate regiment. They take grisly trophies, stringing necklaces of skulls, flaying skins to drape over their tanks, or building charnel altars after a victory where they heap the corpses of the slain as offerings to Khorne. Interestingly, Khorne's influence doesn't always mean mindless berserk fury. The Blood Pact, one of the most notorious traitor forces devoted to Khorne, maintained strict military discipline, even as they devoted every kill to their god. Khorne values martial prowess and honor in battle, as well as mindless fury. A well-drilled regiment that uses squad-level coordination to maximize kill counts can please Khorne greatly. The difference is in motivation. Every action is now driven by rage and the exaltation of combat. Any previous notions of mercy or restraint are annihilated. Surrender is no longer accepted or given. Khornat soldiers often execute prisoners, sometimes by literally tearing them apart, as sacrifices. They also have zero tolerance for sorcery or psychic powers in their ranks. Khorne despises witchcraft. If their regiment had sanctioned psykers before, those unfortunates are usually the first to be decapitated or turned into living target practice once Khorne's sway takes over. A Khornate regiment's tactics may evolve to suit their patrons' preferences. Expect more aggressive strategies, rapid assaults, flanking maneuvers that close distance quickly, reckless pushes through kill zones heedless of casualties. They might employ gladiatorial practices like pitting squads against each other in training to weed out the weak and spur bloodlust. Their command hierarchy may shift to favor the fiercest fighters. The mantra, "might makes right," rules. A general who turns to Khorne may challenge rivals to duels for leadership, or be challenged by his once subordinates if they feel he's not savage enough. The result is that the meanest, most brutal individual ends up in charge of a Khornate warband. One might darkly joke that in fighting for Khorne, they are doing what they always did, only the flag they fight under has changed. Nurgle, the Plague. Lord's Contagion. Nurgle, the chaos god of decay, disease, and enduring despair turned acceptance, casts a very different shadow over a traitor regiment. A unit corrupted by Nurgle becomes a more morbid force altogether. Physically, they undergo hideous changes. Flesh bloated with corruption, skin marked by suppurating sores that don't heal, and indeed don't seem to trouble them. They adorn themselves with symbols of Rot the Fly, the three-circle icon of Nurgle, and often carry the stench of putrescence into battle like a miasma. To the horror of their enemies and former comrades, Nurgle-worshipping soldiers might fight on despite wounds that should be fatal, laughing with gurgling mirth as toxic blood and pus weep from their injuries. They have embraced Grandfather Nurgle's gifts, becoming plague-bearers in the figurative sense, if not literally turning into plague-bearer demons. In terms of mindset, where Khorne's followers are consumed by rage, Nurgles are filled with foul exuberance and a strange camaraderie. Having given themselves to the Lord of Pestilence, they have let go of the fear of death entirely. In fact, many come to love the diseases that infest them. Each cough or oozing lesion is viewed as a blessing that ties them closer to their patron. This twisted sense of joy means their morale is perversely high. They sing ribald, plague-ridden marching songs and joke as shells explode around them. The nightmares that once haunted them are smothered by Nurgle's foul comfort, a mental numbing and acceptance. They often refer to each other as brothers and sisters, even more than typical guard units do, bonded by the shared experience of rot. On the battlefield, Nurgle-aligned traitors excel in wars of attrition and defense. They will fortify positions with zealous dedication, standing unflinching under bombardment that would send normal troops running. After all, why seek cover when you feel no pain and have no hope of a clean death? In fact, these soldiers might intentionally expose themselves to enemy fire to spread Nurgle's gifts, letting foes see their horrific visages and perhaps even purposefully bursting infected boils so that sprays of contagion fly toward the enemy lines. Chemical and biological warfare becomes their forte. If they have access to artillery, they'll rig shells to be filled with corrosive slime, disease-ridden sludge, and virulent gases. A Nurgle-corrupted regiment might welcome the outbreak of plague in a besieged city, knowing it will weaken the defenders, while they themselves wade through plague-ridden areas unscathed, or at least unperturbed by the sickness. Their tactics often involve slow, grinding advances or stalwart stands. They are hard to rout because panic just isn't a thing they experience anymore. What is there to fear when you've accepted the worst the universe can throw at you? Instead, they plod forward inexorably. Gas masks optional, many no longer bother as the toxins in the air only strengthen them. They will use cover when sensible, but the urgency to avoid injury is gone. Being shot is almost a badge of honor. It's not that they are suicidal like Khornates, rather they embody a grim inevitability. They know they will outlast the enemy through sheer resilience. Indeed, enemy reports often speak of bullets and las beams that felled plague troopers, not keeping them down for long, supposedly dead soldiers, thought slain in a trench, later rising with unnatural vitality to bayonet attackers who assumed them corpses. Whether by true necromancy or just phenomenal hardiness is hard to tell. One hallmark of Nurgle's touch is contagion as a weapon. A traitor guardsman blessed by Nurgle might carry homemade grenades full of infectious filth, or even hurl the bloated, diseased corpses of their own fallen at the enemy to spread sickness. In sieges, they poison water supplies without a second thought, sometimes with their own tainted blood. They also have been known to keep fighting even after an area is saturated with lethal toxins, ones that would kill unprotected loyalists in minutes. Such tactics break the spirit of enemy forces. There's nothing more demoralizing than watching your shots puncture a charging guardsman's abdomen, only for him to grin through a maggot-riddled face and keep coming, entrails literally spilling out, eager to share his suffering with you. Tzeentch, the changer of ways. Tzeentch is the chaos god of sorcery, scheming, and change. A regiment swayed by Tzeentch often turns through intrigue and the promise of forbidden knowledge or mastery over fate. In contrast to the brute fury of Khorne or the blunt decay of Nurgle, Tzeentch's corruption is subtle and intellectual, at least at first. The changes in such a unit can start invisibly: secretive behavior, an uptick in strange dreams among the troops, orders being carried out in oddly efficient or oddly convoluted ways as if some unseen plan is being followed. A Tzeentch corrupted regiment may keep its treachery under wraps far longer than others. They might still pretend loyalty while they maneuver into an advantageous position to betray their allies at a critical moment, much as the Volskani Cataphracts did when they revealed their true colors mid-deployment. Visually, Tzeentch's soldiers might begin to display occult symbolism, though they often hide it beneath uniforms until open rebellion. The 8-pointed star of Chaos Undivided might be less common in their ranks than intricate personal sigils, odd geometric patterns or glimmering runes painted on the inside of armor and weapon casings. When their true allegiance comes to light, you might see armor repainted in vibrant, shimmering hues like cobalt, violet, and gold, colors associated with Tzeentch's iconography. Some even wear robes or cloaks covered in mystical eyes and glyphs over their flak vests, embracing a more cult sorcerer aesthetic atop their military gear. The most significant change, however, is the presence of sorcery and mutation. Tzeentch revels in both. A Traitor Guard regiment under Tzeentch's wing will develop an unusually high number of witches in its ranks. Minor psychers who would have been too afraid to show their abilities under the Imperium, or might not even have realized their potential, are encouraged to let loose. Discipline manuals are replaced by tattered grimoires. It's not uncommon for such a warband to be led by a rogue psyker or magister, a cult leader who doubles as a sorcerer. These leaders weave complex battle plans that rely on trickery and arcane support, illusions to mislead the enemy, hexes to sabotage enemy weapons, summoning rituals timed to coincide with major offensives. On the battlefield, deception and strategy become the hallmark of Tzeentch's devotees. They will rarely charge headlong unless desperate. More often, they'll feint retreats, set ambushes, and manipulate the flow of battle as if it's a grand chess game. One might find it paradoxical that mere guardsmen could pull off such devious tactics, but remember that by this point they are guided by a chaos power that literally embodies cunning. Furthermore, they might have aid from esoteric quarters, bound demon spirits whispering guidance, or actual Tzeentchian daemons like flamers and horrors capering among their ranks, sowing confusion with sorcerous fire. The presence of these entities can make a regiment's attack utterly bewildering to loyalist defenders. Foes report gunfire that turns into flocks of screeching warp birds mid-flight, or men that vanish behind a wall only to reappear instantly behind Imperial lines, perhaps via teleportation sorcery or warp portals. Mutation is also a reality. Tzeentch is the most prone of the dark gods to twisting flesh in bizarre ways. Traitor guardsmen might find limbs merging or sprouting into tentacles, extra eyes opening on their flesh, or strange color-shifting patterns crawling across their skin. Unlike the relatively stable corruption of Khorne or Nurgle, who often lock their followers into one state of being, berserker or plague-ridden, Tzeentch's gifts can change from day to day. This can be both a blessing and a curse to the soldiers. One morning, a trooper might wake with preternaturally sharp vision, useful for a marksman, and by the next week that gift might evolve into something less convenient, like a literal third eye that can see into the warp but drives him slightly mad. The regiment often takes these mutations in stride, or even views them as signs of favor, chosen by change itself. They might incorporate mutants into specialized roles. A soldier whose arms fuse into a single writhing tentacle mass might no longer fire a gun well, but perhaps he can operate as a living weapon in close combat, or a horrifying shock trooper that scares the enemy witless. A Tzeentchian regiment will often have secret objectives beyond just defeating the foe in front of them. They love the long game. They might be securing arcane artifacts, manipulating other factions into fighting each other, or setting up a ritual that requires a battle's carnage as fuel. They are the ones likely to betray even their chaos allies at a critical juncture, because the plan changed. Serving the changer of ways means endless scheming and a propensity for double-cross. Within the regiment, this can create a climate of paranoia and backstabbing, if not held in check by a strong leader. But often, a powerful sorcerer general emerges to dominate the warband's direction, and his word is law, courtesy of deadly spells and Tzeentch's backing. Under such leadership, a traitor guard force can become a razor-edged tool of destiny, carving at the Imperium, according to some grand design even loyalists struggle to fathom. Slaanesh, the prince of excess on the front lines. Slaanesh, the chaos god of pleasure, excess, and sensation, might at first seem an odd match for the grim realities of a guardsman's life. But Slaanesh's temptations find fertile ground in the extreme highs and lows of warfare. A regiment falling to Slaanesh undergoes a shift toward hedonism and sadistic enjoyment of war. These soldiers have discovered a perverse delight in the very things that once horrified them. The cacophony of battle, the concussive thump of artillery, the staccato rattle of autoguns, the screams of the dying, becomes to them a symphony of sensation. They want more of it, need more of it, in ever louder, ever more intense crescendos. Outwardly, Slaanesh-marked traitors may transform their appearance in flamboyant ways. Expect bright colors, personalized adornments, and a disregard for the utilitarian drabness of standard-issue uniforms. They might cut and restyle their flak armor, adding spiked collars, flowing silken scarves looted from nobles, or painting garish patterns that violate every rule of camouflage. They wear fetishes of excess, strings of ears taken from victims as necklaces, or rings made from the fused glass of scorched sand where a particularly large explosion took place, a memento of that thrilling blast. Some style their hair into wild shapes or dye it improbable hues if materials are available, all forms of self-expression and rebellion against the uniformity the Imperial Guard enforced. Their behavior in camp or on the march grows erratic and unnervingly jovial. Laughter, frantic and a bit unhinged, spreads through their tents at night. They indulge in any available vice, drinking themselves into stupors with any fermentable liquid, sniffing strange, warp-tainted drugs that heighten sensation, engaging in acts of violence or carnality with equal enthusiasm. To them, pain and pleasure blur together. Ironically, their tolerance for the hardships of campaigning might actually increase in some ways. A flensing wind of razor dust that would flay a normal man's skin might be stood into by a Slaaneshi soldier who closes his eyes and enjoys the feeling of each tiny cut. Their nerves interpret extremes of pain as exquisite sensation. This makes them frighteningly tough in combat. A mortally wounded Slaaneshi cultist might spend his last moments pulling himself closer to an enemy, not to deliver a final blow, but simply to taste the blood spraying from his own gut wound as it mingles with the air, savoring the experience. On the battlefield, their tactics revolve around shock and awe, but with a twisted flair. They love loudness and grand displays. For instance, a traitor tank crew under Slaanesh's sway might rig amplifiers to their hull, blaring deafening war sirens or even music, a discordant, adrenaline-pumping melody as they charge. Infantry may use psychedelic munitions grenades that burst with not just shrapnel, but blinding multicolored smoke or incendiaries that bathe the night in strangely beautiful flames. The goal is to overwhelm the enemy's senses, instilling terror or confusion, while simultaneously providing the Slaaneshi troops the sensory high they crave. One iconic aspect of Slaanesh's influence is the intersection of violence and art. These traitors often turn slaughter into performance. There are accounts of Slaanesh corrupted fighters using their blades almost like paintbrushes, slicing arteries so sprays of blood create patterns on walls or snow, then stepping back to admire the effect even as gunfire zings past their ears. They may take captives not for interrogation, but for torture that doubles as entertainment, both for themselves and as a method to send waves of horror through enemy ranks. Nothing unnerves a regiment like hearing the amplified screams of their captured comrades mixed with oddly ecstatic laughter from the captors. Another battlefield tendency is speed and rhythm. Slaanesh is the swiftest of the dark gods, and his devotees prize rapid movement. Traitor guardsmen might strip off heavy gear to move faster, or drive their vehicles at reckless speeds to feel the rush. Assaults could come as blitzkrieg-style raids where the emphasis is on an exhilarating charge. Their superiors, if one can use that word in a Slaaneshi context, leaders often act more like ringmasters of a carnival of carnage. Coordinate attacks to maximize dramatic effect, perhaps hitting at dawn with the sun behind them for dazzling flare, or during a thunderstorm so each lightning flash silhouettes their advance in theatrical fashion. Notably, Slaanesh's followers develop an unsettling charisma. To outsiders, they appear depraved and insane, but among their own, they share a magnetic bond in the pursuit of excess. This can translate into highly cohesive small groups, almost like cliques, that fight extremely well together because they're all on the same wavelength of whatever high or thrill they're chasing. It's not uncommon for Slaaneshi units to partake in synchronized battle rituals, war dances, or drumming on tank hulls before an attack, to whip themselves into euphoria. When they finally surge forward, it's with elation on their faces, as if charging not into battle, but onto a stage where they are the stars. In close combat, these soldiers can be eerily skilled, their reflexes sharpened by hypersensitivity. Some fight in a trance-like state, moving with grace and speed that seems impossible, dodging blows with feline agility or contorting in ways a pain-fearing person wouldn't attempt. They often wield exotic melee weapons if available. Whips, dueling blades, razor-sharp chains, relishing the feel of each swing. Firearms in their hands may be modified to create brighter muzzle flashes or louder reports. A multi-lass volley from a Slaanesh held position might be accompanied by whoops of delight every time a shot hits flesh and produces a satisfying shriek. Ultimately, a Slaanesh corrupted regiment becomes a traveling carnival of war crimes. The daily routine that once defined them, drill, chores, sentry duty, is replaced by an unpredictable cycle of indulgence and violence. One day they may be lethargic, lounging in a drugged stupor. The next, frenzied and restless, craving an outlet. This unpredictability makes them dangerous foes. Unbound by normal human limits of morale or exhaustion, they fight until utterly spent, chasing the next high of sensation, whether that's the moment a bayonet plunges into an enemy's heart or the exquisite agony as an enemy's bullet punches through their own shoulder. In summary, the chaos god that claims a traitor regiment profoundly shapes what that regiment becomes. Khorne turns guardsmen into berserk killers, obsessed with martial honor and bloodshed. Nurgle remakes them as plague-ridden diehards who revel in decay and endurance. Tzeentch transforms them into scheming conspirators, wielding eldritch power and mastering deception. And Slaanesh liberates and corrupts their senses, making them deadly sybarites, for whom war is the ultimate intoxicant. Some warbands remain devoted to chaos undivided, giving a nod to all the dark gods without exclusivity. But even then, individuals within might lean toward one power or another, creating a patchwork of traits. For the Imperium, facing a traitor guard regiment is bad enough. Understanding which ruinous power drives it is crucial to countering it. A commander who misreads fanatic berserkers as a foe that can be intimidated, or who tries to attrition a foe that literally thrives on attrition, Nurgle's lot, will quickly join the ranks of the dead, or the damned. Life after damnation. The traitor regiment in action. The moment a regiment turns against the Imperium, its members cross a threshold into a new existence. No longer bound by the Astra Militarum's rigid code and oversight, they must forge a different way of war and life under the aegis of chaos. This transition is rarely smooth. Some vestiges of their old military structure remain, warped by their new allegiance. Other aspects change overnight. To truly understand post-defection behavior of a chaos-aligned guard regiment, we must look at how their hierarchy, tactics, daily life, and relationships all evolve or degenerate after embracing the dark gods. Hierarchy and leadership. Under chaos. In the Imperium, a regiment's chain of command is sacrosanct, backed by law and the threat of commissars. In a chaos warband, hierarchy can be more fluid, yet it often persists in some form. Humans are still human even when corrupted. They function effectively with leadership and roles. However, authority now derives from power, charisma, or divine favor, rather than a munitorum commission. A former colonel who led his men into heresy might remain in charge, reinventing himself as a chaos champion or warlord. His authority, though, rests on delivering results and pleasing the Dark Patron. If he shows weakness, he's likely to be deposed, violently, by an ambitious subordinate or replaced by a more favored servant of the gods. Some warbands splinter immediately during or after defection, especially if the act of betrayal involved fragging hated officers. In such cases, the soldiers might rally behind whoever proved strongest or most persuasive in the chaos of mutiny. It could be a brutal sergeant who took charge when the captains were executed, or a sorcerer whose mystical powers cowed the others into obedience. In the New Order, traditional ranks often give way to more barbaric or cultic titles. Instead of major or lieutenant, you get leaders styled as Blood Prince, Plague Marshal, Warp Seer, Blessed Champion, etc. These titles reflect both their new identities and the sources of their authority: martial might, favor of Nurgle, psychic power, respectively. One constant is that leadership under chaos tends to enforce itself through fear and reward rather than duty. A traitor commander can't rely on drill discipline or threat of court-martial. He must either inspire fanatical loyalty or terrorize his troops into compliance, often some mix of both. Many use the promise of the Dark God's rewards. Follow me and Khorne will favor you with strength and skulls aplenty. Or obey, and Grandfather Nurgle's blessings will spare you this plague. The stick side of that equation is usually swift punishment for dissent. In a Khornate regiment, a soldier who questions an order might be publicly beheaded with a chainsword, his dripping head mounted as a warning. In a Tzeentchian-led group, a naysayer could be turned into a gibbering chaos spawn by the leader's sorcery. An even more horrifying deterrent. Despite the brutality, some traitor regiments manage a grim form of camaraderie. Shared damnation can bond soldiers, and a canny leader plays on that. The commander might position himself not just as a boss, but as the one who freed his men from the shackles of the Imperium. He allows them indulgences previously forbidden, making himself popular even as he leads them into perdition. Think of a warlord who distributes looted liquor and lets discipline loosen when off duty. The troops may love him for it, conveniently overlooking that they now fight for a hellish cause. In other cases, leadership is less about rallying and more about dominating. A Chaos Space Marine, if present, more on that soon, might simply rule by might, towering over human troops and enforcing orders at the end of a bolt gun. Tactics and warfare of the damned. Once a guard regiment goes renegade, their tactical doctrine often shifts out of necessity and newfound philosophy. Cut off from Imperial support, they cannot afford attrition the way loyal regiments sometimes can. Yet, ironically, many traitor units become more reckless and ferocious in combat, either out of fanaticism or the fatalistic knowledge that there's no going back. The result is a spectrum of approaches. Some warbands remain as tactically disciplined as ever, only their objectives have changed, while others adopt nearly heretical, to Imperial tacticians, strategies to leverage their chaos-granted advantages. Without high command oversight, traitors have tactical freedom. They might employ strategies the Imperium forbade. For instance, using demon summoning rites as part of a battle plan. One cell of cultist soldiers could be designated to ritually slaughter a village behind enemy lines, mid-battle, not as an atrocity for its own sake, though it is that too, but to summon a pack of furies or a tide of Nurglings at a key moment. Coordinating conventional tactics with warp trickery becomes a hallmark of chaos operations. A renegade general might time an artillery barrage to coincide with a summoned rain of blood or acidic mist, knowing the supernatural element will sow confusion that his fighters can exploit. The loss of standardized supply lines forces creative tactics. A traitor force low on ammunition might adopt stealth and close quarters assaults to conserve bullets, knives, and makeshift blades, coming out under cover of darkness to silently eliminate sentries and steal their kit. If fuel runs short for vehicles, they could revert to defensive ambush tactics, using terrain to trap and then scavenging from the enemy. Conversely, if a warband has recently looted an armory or struck a deal with the Dark Mechanicum to refit their tanks, they might wage a blitzkrieg before their finite fuel and shells run out, trying to break the foe quickly. Chaos psychology influences tactics too. A Slaanesh-lined regiment might emphasize shock and awe, as noted earlier, fast strikes at nerve centers, loud and flashy to maximize the psychological impact. A Nurglite force might intentionally draw out an engagement, giving time for disease to weaken the foe, or stand and grind in trench warfare, where their unnatural resilience gives them the edge. Khorne forces frequently prefer frontal assaults and close combat, but they aren't above using preliminary bombardments or armored spearheads. The difference is they'll push those to the extreme and follow through with unrelenting ferocity. Tzeentchian traitors might lay intricate traps, feigned retreats that lure loyalists into minefields or kill zones pre-sighted for mortar fire, with perhaps a cursed twist, such as mines made from demonic devices that trigger not just shrapnel, but bursts of warp fire. Crucially, traitor guardsmen often fight with the desperation of those who have burned their bridges. Surrender is rarely an option. The Imperium offers no mercy to captured heretics aside from a quick execution if lucky. Therefore, they will take risks and expend lives in ways that confound conventional military logic. To an Imperial commander, it might look like fanatics charging into our guns, heedless of casualties, or madmen holding that fortress to the last man. In reality, those traitors either believe their dark gods will protect them, or they figure dying in battle beats facing Imperial retribution later. Either way, it makes them dangerously determined. They might booby-trap their own positions with daemonic explosives to deny them to an enemy if overrun, or rig their final artillery shells to release chemical poisons as a spiteful parting gift when they're about to be defeated. Daily life, logistics, and morale. What is day-to-day existence for a guardsman once he's chosen damnation? In a word, harsh. Freed from the Imperium's strictures, yes, but also deprived of its vast infrastructure. Food, water, ammo, medical supplies, all must be obtained through plunder, cunning, or dark miracle. Traitor regiments on the move essentially live as raiders. They cannot rely on towering supply dumps and quartermasters. Instead, they raid Imperial depots, ambush PDF convoys, or scavenge battlefields for everything from ammunition to spare socks. This fosters a survival of the fittest mentality in camp. If you're hungry, you'd better have made friends with whoever's cooking, perhaps literally cooking something unsavory. If you need your Lost Gun's power cell recharged, maybe you trade a favor to the cult tech priest who has a jury-rigged generator fueled by demonically charmed promethium. Nothing is free anymore except what you take. Morale in such circumstances becomes a strange beast. Early on, many traitors feel a surge of grim euphoria, liberation from the old rules. They've spat in the eye of the universe and lived. That can carry them for a while. They'll reminisce around their makeshift campfires about the day they fragged the colonel, or how they broke and ran from the commissar's firing squad and got away with it. That shared outlaw status is a bonding experience. And of course, they have the fervor of new converts. Zeal in the service of chaos can be as intense as, or more than, any Imperial faith. They genuinely believe in their new cause now, whether it's tearing down the Imperium that betrayed them or earning the favor of their chosen god through glorious deeds. Fanaticism can prop morale even when conditions are worse than they ever endured as loyalists. However, as reality sets in, life under chaos can be demoralizing in new ways. Illness might sweep the camp, excepting Nurgle devotees who don't mind, or starvation if they operate in a barren region. There is no leave, no rotation off the front. This warband fights until it dies or wins freedom on its own terms. For some, especially those who turned out of desperation rather than conviction, regret festers. They dare not voice it, that it be a death sentence, but they mourn comrades left behind, or the lost promise of Imperial honor. To cope, many dive deeper into their new creed. Essentially, the only way out is through. Prove that betraying the Emperor was worth it by doubling down. Commit more atrocities, win more battles, gather more dark rewards. It's a gambler's logic after a point of no return. In terms of routine, a Chaos regiment might still maintain some military habits, patrols, drills, weapon maintenance, if only to stay alive. But expect more eccentric activities sprinkled in. Daily devotions to the Emperor are replaced by blood rites or toxin inhalation ceremonies or whatever bizarre ritual fits their patron. A unit of Khorne worshippers might start every morning sparring brutally with each other, drawing real blood to offer on an altar made from a wrecked sentinel's hull. A Nurgle camp at dusk might have a jovial communion where they all consume a communal stew laced with corpse filth and pus, sharing Nurgle's blessings among them. Slaaneshi cult soldiers spend evenings in debauched gatherings, wailing strange music, perhaps torturing a slave for entertainment, indulging in combat drugs so that they head into battle the next day on a euphoric high, or crashing low as the case may be. Tzeentchian cadres might gather to hear their sorcerer read portents from the spilling guts of a sacrificial victim, issuing new orders based on these divinations. It's all very far removed from the tidy uplift speeches and prayer services of an Imperial commissar or preacher. A critical piece of the daily life puzzle is the dark mechanicum and logistics. Many renegade forces eventually seek out heretic tech priests or dark mechanicum forges to keep their gear running. Those treasonous tech adepts can improvise repairs beyond the ken of normal troops, blending demonic essence with machinery, or refueling vehicles with warp-tainted substances when promethium runs dry. For a price, often paid in souls or artifacts, the Dark Mechanicum might supply ammo or even fabricate new weapons for a warband. For example, in the long Vraks campaign, traitor forces eventually established makeshift forges to keep their war machines operational, effectively integrating cult engineers into their ranks to replace the support companies they'd lost. Of course, using corrupted machinery has its dangers. A tank repaired with demon-infused parts might literally develop a malevolent mind of its own. But beggars, especially damned ones, can't be choosers. Freed from the old dogmas, these war bands might also accept into their ranks individuals they once shunned or executed. Mutants, rogue psychers, heretical tech priests, and even aliens in rare cases. Any asset that can help them fight and survive may be embraced. A regiment that once prided itself on parade ground purity could, within months of defecting, be fighting shoulder to shoulder with clawed mutant brutes and warp-touched witches. Such allies would have been unthinkable under the Imperial creed, but under Chaos, might makes right. This infusion of the strange and monstrous further blurs the warband's identity. Over time, most traitor regiments lose any semblance of their old selves. They become something new and frightening, a patchwork host of the damned, bonded not by homeland or honor, but by raw hatred and devotion to dark gods. Alliances and rivalries. Dealing with Chaos Space Marines and demons, traitor guardsmen do not exist in a vacuum. Once they join the infernal side, they often find themselves fighting alongside far more fearsome allies, and vying for favor or survival among them. Chaos Space Marines. Many human traitors end up under the command or influence of Chaos Space Marines, the heretic Astartes. These superhuman warriors, once the Emperor's Angels of Death and now Dreadlords of Chaos, often raise and lead hordes of mortals to do the grunt work of their wars. From the perspective of a renegade guardsman, serving alongside a Chaos Marine is a mix of terror, awe, and resentment. On one hand, a single traitor Astartes is a walking engine of destruction. Their mere presence can turn the tide and give mortal traitors a rallying point. Many cultists come to revere them as demigods or chosen champions of the dark gods. On the other hand, Astartes treat mortal lives as disposable assets. An Iron Warrior's warsmith commanding a siege might send waves of traitor guardsmen into a breach just to absorb bullets before his power-armored brethren charge. The exact same way the Imperium used them, or worse. The dynamic varies by legion or warband. The Black Legion, Abaddon's forces, regularly incorporates large armies of traitor humans, using them much as the Imperium uses the guard cannon fodder and support. Though notably Abaddon has granted some capable human commanders a degree of respect and autonomy if they deliver results. The Alpha Legion is infamous for infiltrating and turning entire regiments and planetary defense forces, effectively puppeteering human troops en masse. If an Alpha Legionnaire is in the shadows, mortal traitors might not even realize which of their officers is the Legion's agent giving them orders. Word-bearers, zealous in chaos worship, often act as dark prophets to the cult armies they raise. They might lead rituals in the field, exhorting their human allies to ecstatic fanaticism before battle, and occasionally sacrificing some of those allies in the process. An honor, they would claim, to die in service of the dark gods. For the humans, having Chaos Marines on your side is a double-edged sword for morale. It's encouraging to think the gods favor you enough to send their mightiest warriors. But it's also a constant reminder of your inferiority. Tensions can spark if, say, resources are scarce. Astartes will always take the best weapons and loot first, leaving scraps for the mortals. And woe betide the mere human who displeases a Chaos Marine. The phrase, "say no to a Space Marine," does not exist in a heretic's vocabulary. If a burly Plague Marine growls that you should carry ammunition for him, you do it, or he'll likely tear your arms off and find someone else. Some renegade regiments deliberately avoid entangling with Chaos Marines to avoid becoming subservient. They carve out their own little fiefdoms or operate as independent mercenary bands loosely allied to the Chaos cause at large. But even then, eventually they may cross paths, perhaps swearing fealty to a Chaos Marine warlord in exchange for protection, or joining a Black Crusade where all threads of chaos are pulled into the battle line. Demonic allies. Fighting alongside demons is an experience no sane Imperial guardsman ever wants. So by the time mortals do so, sanity is usually long gone or irrelevant. When a traitor regiment manages to summon or otherwise attract demonic entities to the field, it's both a boon and a frightening liability. Lesser demons, bloodletters of Khorne, plague-bearers of Nurgle, horrors of Tzeentch, demonettes of Slaanesh, might surge forth in the wake of a ritual slaughter or a Chaos Champion's invocation. These fiends will rush at the enemy with single-minded purpose corresponding to their nature, bloodletters screaming for skulls, etc. The human traitors might cheer. After all, nothing unnerves loyalist foes more than seeing reality itself tear open with hellish reinforcements. And if the demons are on your side, it feels like vindication, proof that even the Imperium fights with you. However, demons are on nobody's side but their patrons. They are just as likely to slaughter or torment the humans who summoned them, especially once all primary enemies are dead. Wise, a relative term, heretics will try to banish or contain demons once they've served their purpose. For instance, A Tzeentchian sorcerer might dismiss his summoned horrors before they get bored and start immolating his own camp. But often, dismissing a demon is beyond a mere human's abilities. Control is tenuous. If the summoner dies, the bindings can snap, leaving an enraged demon free to lash out indiscriminately. Some warbands incorporate semi-stable demon allies, like possessed soldiers. A few volunteers, or unlucky conscripts, may allow themselves to be possessed by lesser demons between battles, effectively turning into monstrous shock troops when needed. The Word-bearers did this with their elite cultists, and even some non-marine cults emulate it through dark pacts. These possessed humans are hideous to behold, but they can be kept on a psychic leash by a strong leader until unleashed at the enemy. It's the equivalent of keeping attack dogs, if the dogs were demons that might decide to eat their handlers on a whim. Then there are demon engines, tanks or walkers fused with demonic spirits. Traitor guardsmen sometimes have the dubious fortune to fight alongside these horrors, the equivalent of their former Imperial armor, but corrupted. Imagine a soul grinder or a possessed Leman Russ rumbling beside infantry. The soldiers might paint dark sigils on their vehicles and pray to the machine spirits, now machine demons, to favor them. Working with such engines is risky. A demon engine has its own malevolent will. There are tales of chaos gunners who swore they could hear their tank chuckle in hunger for enemy lives, or worse, for theirs. Still, when that demon engine spews warp fire and decimates a loyalist bunker, the mortal followers cheer. They'll worry about its appetite later. In essence, alliances with Chaos Marines and demons elevate a traitor regiment's firepower and fear factor, but also highlight their new station in the cosmic pecking order. They are no longer the main characters in humanity's story. Now they're extras in Chaos's grand drama. A human warlord might rise to great heights, commanding vast armies of cultists and mutants, but he might still bow and scrape when a Chaos Marine Lord walks by, and he definitely holds his breath when a greater demon manifests, hoping it doesn't notice him as a convenient snack. Ideology and motivation. Finally, a word on what keeps these treacherous soldiers going. In the immediate sense, survival and fear of their new masters drive them. But many truly come to believe in the warped ideology they've embraced. They recast their narrative. The Emperor becomes the Corpse Emperor, tyrant of mankind, while Chaos is rebranded as the truth of the universe, or the path to freedom power. They'll insist to themselves and any captive audience that they made a conscious choice for something better. Perhaps they worship Chaos undivided, venerating Chaos as a whole, burning incense before 8-pointed star icons and chanting litanies about ascension and change. Or they stick to their patron deity, shouting, "Blood for the Blood God," or "Papa Nurgle, bless our endeavors," as their new battle cries. Interestingly, some traitors maintain a twisted form of Imperial loyalty in their rhetoric. They claim they are the true humanity, cast out by a corrupt Imperium. This is especially the case in warbands formed from feelings of betrayal. They might say, "The Emperor betrayed us, not we him. We follow new gods who actually answer our prayers." In this way, they psychologically justify their actions as righteous, at least initially. Over time, exposure to the warp and atrocity often erodes any higher-minded justification. Many devolve into pure creatures of chaos, living for battle, sensation, or whatever their god values, with no need for rationales. But as long as they remain somewhat human in mind, these renegades grapple with their own transformation. In rare moments of quiet, rare indeed, an ex-guardsman might think of home or family and feel a pang of what he's lost. He might drown it in whatever passes for drink in the warband, or volunteer for the next raid to distract himself with violence. Within the group, they likely don't speak of such things. Instead, they reinforce each other's zeal with war stories of how blind and pathetic the Loyalists are, or boasting of the dark miracles they've witnessed since turning. In summary, life after defecting to chaos is an unstable mix of newfound empowerment and deepening hardship. The regiment becomes a warband, part army, part cult, part scavenger pack. They adapt or die. Those that adapt can become truly formidable, welding their Imperial training to the unpredictability of chaos. They turn their former comrades' expectations against them, fighting dirty and wild, or disciplined and devious, as suits their needs. And they wake each day, or whatever passes for morning in the eye of terror or war-torn battlefields, knowing that they have charted their own fate, for good or ill. They are free from Imperial rule, but also free of its protection and order. In that void, chaos eagerly fills the gap, becoming their new raison d'etre and the dark glue that holds their fractious band together. From the history books, notorious regiments that fell to chaos. The tales above are but a sampling. Even as far back as the Horus Heresy 10,000 years ago, entire hosts of the Imperial army sided with War Master Horus, proving that the rot of chaos goes all the way back to humanity's origins among the stars. The truth is, the galaxy teems with stories of the lost and the damned. For every famous name, there are a dozen lesser-known tragedies. The Blood Pact, Khorne's disciplined butchers. During the Sabbat World's Crusade, a massive Imperial campaign in the Segmentum Pacificus, Imperial forces encountered a foe that shattered any preconceived notion of heretics being mere rabble. The Blood Pact was a chaos cult army devoted to Khorne, founded by a warlord named Urlach Gore around the mid-600 Asem 41. What made the Blood Pact remarkable was their professionalism. These were not gibbering lunatics charging mindlessly, though they were certainly brutal. They drilled and fought with the cohesion of elite guard regiments, employing cover fire, tactical withdrawals, and combined arms tactics, as well as ritualistic bloodletting and berserker charges when the moment called for it. Urlach Gore himself was said to personally administer the pact that gave the army its name. Each soldier swore a blood oath to Gaur and Khorne, cutting their palms or the throats of captives, and letting the blood soak a ritual cloth as they vowed to serve unto death. This binding act created fanatic loyalty. Many Blood Pact warriors were former guardsmen or PDF troopers from worlds Gaur had conquered. He valued their training and only had to add the fervor of chaos to make them even more dangerous. Clad in blood-red uniforms and grotesque face masks, often made from the flayed faces of enemies, stretched over metal helms, the Blood Pact sowed terror wherever they deployed. In combat, they exemplified how a regiment could fall to chaos, yet maintain military efficiency. At the siege of Vervunhive, depicted in the novel Necropolis, Blood Pact forces under a warlord named Heritor Asphodel invaded an Imperial hive city. They used siege tanks, disciplined infantry waves, chemical weapons, and psyker support in a coordinated assault, overwhelming the defenders. Captured Imperial citizens were mutilated in gruesome displays to demoralize the enemy. One could witness Blood Pact squads operating almost like Cadian shock troops, but with far greater cruelty. They took and held ground with infantry fire and maneuver, but any civilians in those areas would later be found ritually butchered, skulls piled in pyramids. For them, this was both a tactical occupation and a grand offering to Khorne. The Sabbat World's Crusades Imperial commanders, including War Master Makaroth and Colonel Commissar Gaunt's regiment, the Tanith First and Only, learned to respect and fear the Blood Pact. It wasn't just their battle acumen. The Pact also engaged in espionage and subterfuge. On at least one occasion, Blood Pact operatives infiltrated an Imperial base disguised as laborers and even as wounded guardsmen, committing assassination and sabotage behind Imperial lines. This demonstrated that a chaos-corrupted force could match the Imperium not only in open battle, but in the shadows as well. To defeat the Blood Pact ultimately took many hard years and the decapitation of their leadership. Erloch Gore was eventually defeated, accounts conflict on whether he was slain or vanished, and his armies fragmented. But even in fragmentation, they gave birth to something new. The next entry on our list, the Sons of Sek, traitors trained by the Imperium. As Erloch Gore's health waned and his Blood Pact forces took blows in the Sabbat worlds, one of his lieutenants, Anakwanar Sek, decided to carve out his own path. Sek was a chaos warlord, also sworn to Khorne, with grand ambitions. He formed the Sons of Sek, essentially an offshoot of the Blood Pact intended to be its successor and superior. What's fascinating is how he went about improving on Gore's model. He incorporated the expertise of a captured Imperial Guard officer to train his new army. This officer was General Noche Sturm, an Imperial commander who had fallen into disgrace, thanks largely to conflicts with Gaunt and a string of failures. Sturm was captured by Sek's forces on the world Geryon. Rather than sacrifice him outright, Sek offered Sturm a chance for revenge and a return to purpose by drilling the Sons of Sek in the tactics of the Imperial Guard. Sturm, bitter and broken, agreed. Alongside Sturm was a Blood Pact defector named Mabun Itogawa, who also provided insights. Under these tutors, the Sons of Sek blended the ferocity of Chaos Zealots with the structured battle doctrine of the Guard. When the Sons of Sek emerged in later campaigns, the Imperium was shocked at their effectiveness. They were as well organized as the Blood Pact, if not more so, and were led by a cunning intelligence. Sek himself was deviously clever and an accomplished psyker to boot. The Sons of Sek even showed a flair for psychological warfare. During one incident on a world called Ancrion Sextus, they masqueraded as loyalist reinforcements. They had procured genuine Imperial uniforms, or excellent forgeries and signal codes. Posing as a friendly regiment, they infiltrated an Imperial-held city and only revealed their true colors when it was far too late for the defenders. The subsequent slaughter was total. This ploy underscores a chilling point. An entire regiment that defects can use the trust and credibility it once had as an Imperial force against the Imperium. Who better to breach the Imperium's security than those who know its protocols, its language, its expectations? The Sons of Sek actively exploited this. They had among them former Imperial soldiers, not just Sturm, who knew how the Munitorum organized supply depots, how an Imperial colonel expects a subordinate to report, etc. They could mimic loyalty until the knife was at the victim's throat. Ultimately, Anakwanar Sek's uprising ended only after fierce fighting and his eventual death at the hands of Imperial agents, Gaunt's team, during a critical mission. The Sons of Sek fractured without Sek's unifying presence, but many survivors likely folded back into other Chaos forces in the Sabbat worlds, perpetuating the cycle of Chaos armies rising and falling. Vraksian Traitor Militia, the long war of attrition. Perhaps no account of a Guard force falling to Chaos is as exhaustive, or grotesquely costly, as the Siege of Vraks. Vraks was an Imperial armory world, essentially a planet-sized arsenal, overseen by the Adeptus Ministorum. In M41, it became the stage for a 17-year conflict that began as a local rebellion and ended as a full-blown chaos war. The seed of heresy was Cardinal Astra Militarum, the senior ecclesiarchy official on Vraks. Disillusioned by the Imperium's politics and greedy for power, Zaphon decided to declare Vraks independent. He riled up the planet's vast labor force and the local defense militia, numbering in the millions, with fiery rhetoric about self-determination and the falsehoods of the Imperium. The loyalist officials were assassinated or driven out, and suddenly an entire world, along with its stockpile of weapons and munitions, was in rebel hands. Notably, at the start, this wasn't overtly about chaos. The initial phase was more of a secular rebellion led by a heretical priest. But rebellion in 40K seldom stays free of chaos for long. The Imperium, furious and alarmed, Vrax's arsenal could supply armies for decades, responded by sending the notoriously relentless death corps of Krieg to besiege the world and take it back. Thus began a grinding trench war that makes World War I look brief. The Vraksian Traitor Militia, composed of former PDF and armed fanatics, held off wave after wave of Imperial Guard assaults by leveraging the planet's formidable defenses, fortress walls, bunkers, endless minefields, and the seemingly limitless ammo stockpiles they controlled. What they lacked in finesse, they made up for in sheer volume of fire and manpower, willing to die for their cardinal. As the siege dragged on year after year, conditions grew hellish. Millions died on both sides. Zaphon, the instigator, eventually was gravely wounded and fell ill. In the vacuum of strong leadership, the door was open for chaos to slither in. Various Chaos Space Marine warbands took interest in Vraks. After all, a drawn-out war is a buffet for the Chaos Gods. Khorne berserkers of the World Eater's Legion arrived first, turning sections of the front into literal slaughterhouses of close combat. The loyal Kriegers, grim as they were, suddenly found themselves facing howling, power-armored giants in the smoke of no man's land, adding a terrifying new dimension to the war. Later, Nurgle's influence became paramount. The trench warfare, with its disease, rot, and despair, was fertile ground for the Plague God. The pivotal moment came when the traitors, now increasingly cultists, performed a grand ritual in Vrax's corpse-choked tunnels. This culminated in the summoning of Catifacts, a great unclean one, greater demon of Nurgle, onto the battlefield. The bloated horror wreaked havoc, spreading a supernatural plague that decimated Imperial attackers. Many of the Vraksian militia, already ravaged by real diseases, welcomed Nurgle's gifts to spare them pain. They became plague marines or zombie-like infected, who fought on even after being riddled with shrapnel. By the end, the Vraksian forces had transformed from a mere renegade militia into a chaos host comprising Khornate and Nurglesque devotees, supported by Chaos Space Marines, elements of the Death Guard, World Eaters, and others, and even renegade titans and aircraft. It took the intervention of the Adeptus Astartes, including the Grey Knights given their demonic presence, and the eventual unleashing of virus bombs to finally break the defenders. Vraks was reclaimed by the Imperium, but at staggering cost, over 14 million Imperial casualties across 17 years of warfare. The planet itself was left a toxic, corpse-choked wasteland. Cardinal Zaphon died a raving lunatic amidst the chaos he invited, eventually executed by his own side when he became a liability. The siege of Vraks epitomizes several fall-to-chaos scenarios: a demagogue leader's ambition, troops stuck in unwinnable attrition breeding desperation, and the eventual total corruption of a prolonged conflict. It's a prime case of how chaos might start, as a tool to survive or gain advantage. Zaphon likely welcomed Chaos Marines' help out of desperation, but in the end, chaos consumed the cause entirely. Volscani Cataphracts, the traitors in plain sight. If you want a cautionary tale of how a seemingly loyal regiment can turn out to be rotten to the core, look no further than the Volskani Cataphracts. Hailing from the Volskani system, these were once esteemed Imperial Guard regiments known for their ferocity and discipline. They fought alongside other Imperial forces and earned battle honors. By all accounts, they were loyal servants of the Emperor. Unbeknownst to the Imperium, however, the Volskani had secretly fallen under Chaos influence sometime prior to the 13th Black Crusade. In 999 M41, as Abaddon the Despoiler launched his monumental 13th Black Crusade against Cadia and the Cadian Gate, the Imperium mustered every available force. Several Volskani Cataphract regiments were called to Cadia as part of the reinforcements. They arrived at Kasr Tyrok amidst a grand assembly of Imperial defenders. A welcoming ceremony was held. Mistake number 1. As the Cadian officers and dignitaries greeted what they thought were allies, the Volskani suddenly unfurled chaos banners and opened fire at point-blank range. The Battle of Tyrok Fields ensued, essentially a massacre. The Volskani, already in perfect position within Cadia's defenses, slaughtered the Interior Guard headquarters staff and many soldiers before anyone could react. Cadian units were shocked and thrown into disarray. Their lines had been pierced from within by comrades in arms, turning traitor in a heartbeat. It was a devastating start to the planetary assault. Cadia's high command was decapitated in one fell swoop. Lord Castellan Creed, overall Cadian commander, managed to rally some forces for a counterattack that eventually put down the Volskani at Tyrok Fields. Notably, the Volskani fighters showed no inclination to retreat or surrender. They fought fanatically to the last, many screaming praises to Chaos as they were cut down. In death, some displayed signs of having been physically altered by their devotion. Scarred runes on flesh, sharpened teeth, even minor mutations like blood that sizzled with warp taint. Clearly, these regiments had been hidden Chaos worshippers long enough to undergo ritualistic changes. However, that was not the end of the Volskani. Other elements of their force not present at the ceremony were spread across the system. During the larger war for Cadia that followed, Volskani Cataphract warbands joined the invading Chaos armies. They served alongside the Black Legion and other traitor Astartes in assaults on fortress cities. Notably, in the assault on Kasr Myrak, Volskani troops fighting under Chaos, undivided banners were instrumental in overwhelming that citadel. Survivor accounts describe the Volskani as fighting with almost suicidal rage, and over time they seemed to lose some of their prior discipline, as if the longer they served Chaos openly, the more frenzied and inhuman they became. By battle's end, they were howling barbarians, albeit ones still skilled enough to coordinate with traitor marines in breaching maneuvers. The Volskani Cataphracts underscore the threat of sleeper corruption. For a regiment to fight loyally in many battles and then one day turn on allies suggests their conversion to Chaos was premeditated and orchestrated. Perhaps a Chaos agent, maybe Alpha Legion influence or a corrupted commander, had sown the seeds over years, waiting for the signal. The fact they chose such an opportune, calamitous moment indicates it was part of Abaddon's strategy to cripple Cadia's defense. It worked frighteningly well. How many other loyal regiments harbor similar rot? The very thought must send inquisitors into cold sweats. The Stigmartus, Chaos incarnate in the Jericho Reach. Far from Cadia in the Jericho Reach, a sector isolated from the Imperium and being repacified by the Achilus Crusade, another Chaos host has made infamy, the Stigmartus. Unlike previous examples, which are single regiments or collections of regiments, the Stigmartus is more like a full army, even a society devoted to Chaos war. They are a chaos cult warband operating on multiple worlds, primarily opposing the Imperium's crusading forces in that region. The Stigmartus originated on the world of Tzeentch, which fell to chaos early in the Achilles Crusade. The rulers of Tzeentch apparently embraced the Dark Gods rather than submit to the Imperium, and they raised their standing armies in open revolt. This force took on the name Stigmartus after a signature practice. Its members ritually scar their flesh with the sigils of their masters. The word evokes stigmata, wounds of faith. Every soldier of the Stigmartus is said to bear a branded symbol of their chaos allegiance, literally burned into their skin. This could be an 8-pointed star on the forehead, a Khorne rune on the bicep, or other profane icons depending on their role and patron. Composed of renegades, cultists, mutants, psychers, and everything in between, the Stigmartus nonetheless functions as a coherent military. Reports from Death Watch kill teams and Imperial Guard advisors in the Reach describe Stigmartus units as having a formal hierarchy. They have officers, sometimes called slaughter captains or scourge masters. They drill, they use combined arms tactics with infantry, armor, and even psychic support. It's as if someone took a standard Imperial Guard army, replaced all the pious bits with blasphemy, and turned the discipline up to fanatic levels. Leading the Stigmartus is a man, if he can still be called such, named Archcardinal Ilak Sarda. Sarda is a chaos champion with religious zeal, apt since he was an Imperial cardinal who defected. He is said to be favored by some powerful demonic entity in the region known as the Khorne Stars, which implies the Stigmartus might ultimately serve chaos undivided or a specific archdemon's agenda. Under Sarda's command, the Stigmartus has been the bane of multiple Imperial offensives. They've mustered enormous hordes that laid waste to Imperial footholds, and shown a knack for coordination that outstrips most heretic rabble. For example, in the assault on the world of Dentor, Stigmartus troops managed to jam Imperial comms, deploy chemical weapons to flush out entrenched defenders, and then led a charge of mutant ogrins with tank support that broke the Imperial lines. All while cult sorcerers generated hallucinations and phantom reinforcements to confuse the loyalists. Such a multifaceted plan speaks to an experienced general staff among the traitors, no doubt comprised of ex-Imperial officers who turned, or Chaos Space Marines advising Sarda. Imperial strategists worry that if the Achilles Crusade isn't careful, they'll effectively feed the Stigmartus more disgruntled POWs and desperate defenders to turn. It's the classic chaos tactic of turning the defeated to your side. Very much how the word-bearers spread corruption during the Great Crusade of old. The Stigmartus stands as a testament that chaos can raise empire-scale armies, not just isolated regiments, especially when given time and a power vacuum in a distant region, and many more. For every saga listed above, there are countless others. Some are crushed and forgotten without even making the history books, just another purged world or missing regiment quietly struck from the Imperial records. The pattern is always similar in principle, if endlessly varied in detail. Faith falters, chaos strikes, and new enemies of the Imperium are born. On Atoma Prime in the current century, for example, the celebrated Moabian 6th Regiment betrayed the Imperium and joined a chaos uprising, proving that even honored units can fall if pushed beyond endurance. In the Sabbat worlds, the Infardi cult turned entire pilgrim cities to chaos from within, using the populace's devotion as a weapon against them, desecrating a saint's world in the process. The Shriven were another chaos host in Sabbat sector, led by a coalition of Iron Warriors, Chaos Marines, and traitor humans, showing how these alliances can form armies capable of challenging the Imperial Guard and even Astartes on near equal footing. Groups like the Pilgrims of Hate, a nihilistic warp cult spread across multiple systems from the Eisenhorn Ravenor novels, demonstrate how a chaos rebellion isn't always overtly military at first, but can sabotage and soften targets for the kill. During the Horus heresy itself, as mentioned, countless Imperial army units, the Guard's predecessors, went over to Chaos alongside their traitor Primarchs, establishing a dark tradition of human treachery that continues millennia later. Even in recent times, whisperings from the Cicatrix Maledictum, the great warp rift tearing the galaxy in half, suggest entire scattered regiments, cut off from Segmentum Command, have pledged themselves to local chaos warlords to survive the nightmare of that galaxy-wide upheaval. For every famous name like the Volskani or Blood Pact, there are a dozen lesser-known uprisings. The garrison that surrendered to chaos cultists after decades of neglect, the regiment that vanished in the warp and reappeared years later as something inhuman, the planetary PDF that rose against its governor under the secret tutelage of a dark apostle. The galaxy's endless war produces endless stories of betrayal. By examining these examples, the Imperium tries to learn lessons when it isn't actively suppressing them to prevent giving others ideas. Sometimes they conclude more commissars were needed, or this commander should have been watched, or those troops came from a world with a history of rebellion, mistakes never to repeat. But in the grim darkness of the far future, new wars and new desperations mean that inevitably, somewhere, somehow, another guardsman will lose his faith and raise his weapon against his former masters. The saga of the Traitor Guard is an ongoing one. The Imperium's answer: containment, suppression, and vengeance. Every time an Imperial Guard regiment falls to chaos, the Imperium responds with a mixture of fury, fear, and ruthless pragmatism. To the High Lords and the Inquisition, a traitor regiment isn't just a military threat. It's an infection that must be cauterized from the body of the Imperium, and a lesson to be etched in blood for any who might contemplate similar treachery. The measures taken are often extreme. The Imperium fights this war on two fronts, destroying the traitors themselves and shoring up the loyalty of everyone else. The Inquisition's wrath. The Inquisition, especially the Ordo Hereticus, which deals with heresy and internal threats, and Ordo Malleus, which deals with demonic incursions, takes the lead once a regiment is known to have turned. Inquisitors have sweeping authority to call upon Imperial resources or order drastic actions in the name of preventing chaos's spread. If a regiment defects and is still at large, the Inquisition might declare an extremis diabolus, essentially marking them for total destruction by any means necessary. One infamous example is the aftermath of the First War for Armageddon. Though not a case of a regiment turning, it was a chaos invasion led by the demon Primarch Angron. The Imperial Guard and civilians who fought that war were deemed tainted simply by witnessing the forces of chaos. The Inquisition moved in to conduct a massive purge and cover-up. Millions of loyal guardsmen who had bled for the Imperium were secretly rounded up after victory. Some accounts say they were executed outright or mind-wiped. Others have them shipped to penal colonies in remote space for the rest of their lives. All this to ensure they wouldn't inadvertently spread knowledge of chaos and its demons to the general populace. When the Space Wolves chapter objected vehemently to this horrendous treatment of Imperial heroes, it led to the so-called Months of Shame standoff, nearly a civil war between Space Marines and the Inquisition over the issue. Inquisitor Lord Gesmay Kisnaros was adamant that no one on Armageddon could be allowed to speak of what they saw. Ultimately, many Armageddon veterans were indeed shipped off in silence, their true fate classified at the highest level. This shows the lengths to which the Imperium will go. Better to betray and muzzle your own loyal soldiers than risk chaos gaining a foothold through their memories or fears. When dealing directly with a known traitor regiment, an Inquisitor will use whatever tool is appropriate. They might attach a kill team of Grey Knights or Adeptus Sororitas, Sisters of Battle, to a task force to specifically target any demonic leaders or chaos sorcerers within the traitors decapitating the cult's supernatural leadership. Simultaneously, they could dispatch squads of elite Tempestus Scions, stormtroopers, to eliminate cult VIPs or conduct high-risk strikes, for example, blowing up the traitors' ammo stockpiles or command bunker. The Inquisition also has authority to call on Loyalist Guard or even Space Marine companies to help crush a large-scale rebellion. In many historical cases, such as the suppression of the Molech and Dura renegade armies, it was joint forces of Astartes and Guard under inquisitorial lead that annihilated the traitors. If a planet's entire PDF and populace turns, the Ordo Malleus won't hesitate to call for Exterminatus if recapture seems too costly. Better a dead world than a demon world. Officio Assassinorum, quiet killers to prevent uprisings. Sometimes the Imperium prefers a scalpel to a chainsword. The Officio Assassinorum, specifically its temple-trained assassins, has been deployed to eliminate key figures whose treachery could corrupt thousands. Why fight an entire regiment if taking out one general or demagogue could cause it to collapse or prevent it from turning at all? Consider a planetary governor or beloved colonel who has started dabbling in forbidden rituals or secretly contacting a chaos cult. If the Inquisition gets wind early, they might sanction a Vindicare sniper to put a turbo-penetrator round through the heretic's skull during a public parade, turning the would-be savior of the rebellion into a sudden martyr. And often, without their charismatic presence, the budding revolt withers on the vine. Alternatively, a Calidus shape-shifting assassin could infiltrate the potential traitor's staff, masquerade as a trusted aide, and strike when the target is alone, a single polymorphine-induced blade through the heart, and the nascent chaos plot dies in darkness. There's record of an operation during the Macarian heresy where an Imperial Guard general, acclaimed for his victories but secretly in league with a Tzeentchian cult, was targeted by Officio Assassinorum agents. Before he could openly revolt, a Kalidos, posing as his Vox officer, slit his throat in his command bunker, and the rest of the officers, stunned and leaderless, were easily purged by accompanying stormtroopers. To the public, it was announced the general died a hero in battle. The truth of his heresy and execution remained hidden. These surgical removals are ideal, but not always possible. If a regiment has already gone full traitor and is on the battlefield, assassins might still be used in tandem with conventional forces, say a Vindicare systematically picking off the traitor's sorcerer and heavy weapon teams one by one from kilometers away to sow confusion, or an Eversor berserker assassin unleashed to rampage through the enemy's rear lines, causing terror. An Eversor cares not if the targets are ex-guard. He'll butcher them with the same glee as any Xeno. However, assassins are rare assets deployed only when the strategic gain is immense, such as preventing a popular uprising or decapitating a particularly dangerous chaos warlord. Exterminatus, the final sanction, the Imperium's most dreaded response. Exterminatus is not off the table when dealing with mass traitor outbreaks. If an entire world's Astra Militarum garrison, PDF, and population turn to chaos, the safest solution from Terra's perspective might be to destroy the planet utterly. Viral bombardment, cyclonic torpedoes, atomic fire. There are various methods, all resulting in the world's surface becoming lifeless, or at least no longer supporting human life as we know it. Exterminatus is declared only in extreme situations, but chaos infestations often meet that bar. For example, the world of Kinov III in late M40 had its regiments and citizens fall to a Slaaneshi cult en masse. Surrounded by warp storms and with no hope of timely reconquest, Segmentum Command authorized Exterminatus rather than allow a permanent chaos stronghold. The entire planet was bathed in life-eater virus bombs that killed every living thing in hours. Afterwards, orbital lance strikes ignited the atmosphere, burning the virus and the biosphere away. It is said the planet's charred husk still occasionally echoes with unearthly screams. Whether a warp echo of the billions murdered or something more sinister lingering, no one can say. Exterminatus is also a threat held over Imperial commanders. If you cannot contain a situation, higher authority may choose to end you along with the enemy. This spurs guard commanders and planetary governors to be utterly ruthless in stamping out any sign of heresy in their ranks. They know that pleading for help against an internal chaos rebellion could invite the ultimate sanction. Many would rather die fighting, or even attempt to bargain with lesser chaos forces, than call down Exterminatus upon their own world. The Imperium's stance is unforgiving. The moment a force is deemed irredeemable, it's better to lose one world or one army than risk chaos contagion spreading to 10 more. Astartes and the Sledgehammer. Response: where finesse fails or time is short, the Imperium will send in its ultimate warriors, the Adeptus Astartes, to crush traitor guard forces. Space Marines, the Emperor's Angels of Death, whether loyalist chapters or the Grey Knights, have little trouble cutting through normal humans, even if those humans are veteran soldiers. Many instances exist of Space Marine strike forces deploying to eliminate traitor armies that regular guards struggled with. During the later years of the Vraks campaign, as mentioned, Space Marines from numerous chapters, Red Scorpions, Minotaurs, Black Templars, and others, were brought in to tip the balance. A single Thunderhawk gunship insertion behind enemy lines delivering a kill team of Marines could take out a traitor artillery command or chaos altar that hundreds of guardsmen couldn't reach. Marines excel at decapitation strikes, slaying the traitor commander, obliterating their leadership circle, and watching the less organized heretic rabble crumble. However, the Space Marines are not infinite in number, and they often have wars on many fronts. They usually intervene in rebellions that are particularly egregious, for example, traitors defiling a holy site, or summoning greater demons left and right, or when the timetable demands swift action. Astartes can conquer in hours what might take guard months. One famous action was the Bedab War, where several Space Marine chapters went renegade alongside their planetary levies. Loyalist Marine chapters were dispatched to war against them. While that conflict was mostly Astartes versus Astartes, the Loyalists also had to mop up the renegade guard auxiliary forces of the secessionists, which they did with expected efficiency. Essentially, the Loyalist Marines treat human traitors as speed bumps, purging them with bolter, flamer, and chainsword in shock assaults that leave no time for the heretics to react. The psychological impact on traitor guards when Space Marines arrive is immense. Many lose whatever nerve they had, knowing they face humanity's true angels of death. Some throw down arms and run, only to be cut down anyway. Others fight to the last in fanatic hatred, but the outcome is seldom in doubt. Repression and reforms. In the longer term, the Imperium tries to prevent future defections by addressing what it sees as root causes, often through more oppression, the only tool it really knows. After notable incidents of guard corruption, the Commissariat tends to increase its oversight. Commissars will be quicker to execute soldiers for minor infractions of faith or morale, hoping to scare the rest into compliance. Commanders are instructed to be on the lookout for signs of wavering loyalty, which could be anything from troops not shouting "For the Emperor" loud enough, to someone salvaging a chaos amulet from a corpse, even out of mere curiosity, a dangerous mistake. The Departamento Munitorum has policies implicitly shaped by fear of betrayal. For instance, regiments are routinely raised on one planet and then shipped far away to fight. Ostensibly, this prevents local nepotism or conflict of interest, but it also means if they do rebel, they're on a world where they lack local support. The Imperium rarely allows a guard regiment to stay long on its home planet or any single place after a campaign. They are often redeployed or, if decimated, merged with other units and reflagged. Part of the reason is to avoid a regiment becoming so tight-knit and locally attached that it could turn into a warlord's personal army. Another policy: rotating or dissolving units that have seen too much. If a regiment has fought in a chaos-heavy war zone like the Eye of Terror region and somehow remained mostly loyal, the Imperium often quietly disbands it afterwards. The troops might be mind-wiped or sent as reinforcements piecemeal to other regiments, breaking up their core so any potentially festering trauma or cult influence is diluted. Some are officially reassigned to penal legions, effectively suicide units, as a way to employ those of doubtful loyalty in the most dangerous battles, where their potential betrayal can do minimal harm, and they might redeem themselves only by dying gloriously. The famous Cadian shock troops, known for their repeated exposure to chaos in Black Crusades, were actually very closely watched by the Inquisition at all times, though Cadia's strict culture of discipline and anti-chaos indoctrination made them a unique case of resilience. Speaking of indoctrination, the Ministorum, ecclesiarchy, typically doubles down on its imperial creed efforts wherever a whiff of heresy has occurred. If one regiment falls on a front, the priests attached to all the neighboring regiments will sermonize day and night about the damnation of those traitors. They'll sanctify every foxhole and issue every soldier extra purity seals and prayers. Some soldiers no doubt roll their eyes at this overkill piety, but the idea is to bombard minds with emperor worship to crowd out any sneaky chaos whispers. The effectiveness of this is questionable, especially when soldiers have legitimate grievances like being used as cannon fodder, but it's the Imperium's go-to move. If in doubt, apply more faith and execute a few as examples. The Officio Prefectus, commissaires, also conduct what we might term morale ops, for instance, publicly executing captured members of a traitor regiment in front of loyal troops to make a point. If a handful of traitors are caught, rather than quietly shooting them in a cell, a commissar might bring them out during a mass assembly, declare their sins to all, and then personally blow their brains out with a bolt pistol as an object lesson. In some cases, the corpses of traitor leaders are displayed crucified on the battlefield or hung from fortress walls with placards reading "Heretic," not just as punishment, but as psychological warfare for both the enemy and any wavering loyalists. This is the fate that awaits if you falter. Censorship and secrecy. Finally, the Imperium tries as much as possible to erase even the knowledge of a regiment's defection from history. After a campaign is over, the official records might state the 33rd Wativarian Regiment was wiped out heroically to the last man, rather than admit it turned coat. Medals and unit banners are quietly removed from halls of honor. Families of the soldiers back home might receive notice that their sons and daughters all died fighting Xenos or went MIA. Anything but they betrayed us. Only in restricted archives on Terra or in an Inquisitor's data vault will the true story be preserved. This is both to prevent giving other malcontents ideas and to preserve the image that the Imperial Guard is unwaveringly loyal, a necessary lie to maintain morale and public confidence. Of course, sometimes the cat is out of the bag, as in the Volscani Cataphracts' very public betrayal on Cadia. In such cases, propaganda is used to spin it. These weren't real guardsmen. They were imposters all along, or they were a tiny minority driven mad by an external curse, now purged. The Imperium will claim, perhaps, that the Volskani were corrupted by proximity to the Eye of Terror and should have been detected sooner, implying it was a fluke, then laud the heroic response of Creed in putting them down. The message to other regiments is clear. If you stray, you will be crushed and forgotten, but if you stay true, you'll be honored for avenging those who fell. In the end, the Imperium's response to Traitor Guard regiments is as multifaceted as the threat itself. It ranges from the subtle knife in the dark to full planetary annihilation. It is proactive when it can be, preventing or preempting rebellion, and brutally reactive when it must be, scourging those who turned. There is no mercy for traitors. Every guardsman knows that from day one. If you turn to chaos and are captured, a firing squad or a far worse fate in an inquisitorial dungeon awaits. Even those who don't turn but merely witness chaos often suffer for it, as we've seen. The Imperium would rather squander 1,000,000 loyal lives than let one heretic go unpunished or one chaotic seed take root. For the Astra Militarum as a whole, these betrayals and the draconian measures that follow become part of the cautionary lore passed along. Regiment commanders emphasize loyalty as not just a virtue, but survival. The Emperor's wrath, or the Inquisition's, is a far greater fear than any Xeno threat. Ironically, this culture of fear is exactly what chaos exploits. But the Imperium has little choice. It rules by fear and faith intertwined. Thus, the fall of each regiment strengthens the Imperium's resolve to tighten the leash on the others, harden the training, screen the psyche, watch the whispers, execute the suspicious. And yet, for all these efforts, the galaxy remains vast, dark, and brimming with opportunities for the ruinous powers to subvert the unwary. The tragic truth is that no matter how many traitors are burned, somewhere in some trench or barracks, another guardsman's soul is buckling under the weight of horror, and a disembodied voice is cooing promises in his ear. For the Imperium of man, each such fall is both a tragedy and a stark warning, a reminder that the eternal war against chaos is fought not only on battlefields, but within the human soul itself. In the end, even the Emperor's finest can indeed become his deadliest enemies, one lost soul at a time.